The Terps must land a four-star safety to complete the best class of the Mike Locksley era.
You are Locked On Terps, your daily podcast on the Maryland Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everyone? I'm Tre Moore, host of Locked On Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So thank you for making us part of your day. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Maryland must add four-star safety Messiah Delhomme to complete the best class under Mike Locksley, in the best class in the Mike Locksley era. I do think that this 2025 class is already the best class under Mike Locksley for the Maryland Terrapins. It's a special class with special players, but there's one thing about recruiting that seems to always be true in college football or in college sports in general. The class can be good, but there's always a way for it to get a little bit better. And that is exactly the case with this Maryland class. It's a great class. It's a class that we haven't had. I like to call it pretty close to a complete class. But for this to be not only just the best class under Coach Locksley, but the most complete class that it can possibly be, the Terps must add four-star safety Messiah Delhomme. I do want to emphasize that I do believe that this class is in a really good spot and that we have some really good players in a lot of different positions. And overall, it looks like it's going to be a really good class. But like I said, there are always ways where you can add a guy or two to your class to even solidify it even more and have a little bit of an even brighter future than you originally thought that you had going into this class and going into the next recruiting cycle and ending the 2025 class. I love the class. I absolutely do. But Messiah Delhomme, the four-star safety, would put it over the top. And I would say that this is a complete class. If we were able to land Messiah Delhomme, I would say the Maryland 2025 class is complete. It's a roster where we look at through, it has every position group basically we would want. It has all different types of body types, player types that we want, and a bunch of high-level types of players at different important positions. But I think that Messiah Delhomme is a special kid. I think he's a special type of player. 6'1", almost 200-pound safety. He could come into College Park and play pretty early for the Maryland Terrapins. And yeah, there's other schools in the conversation like Ohio State, like Virginia Tech. Those seem to be the top right now. Someone keeps saying that, a lot of people are saying that Ohio State is the favorite and that he's kind of waiting on Ohio State to solidify things overall. And once that happens, he will be a Buckeye, which I think is entirely possible. It would make sense. Ohio State has a pretty good track record of developing players. But I would tell him Ohio State, it's going to be tough to play there. You can play pretty early on at Maryland. And I think he's a guy from Virginia. So it makes sense for him to be considering Virginia and Virginia Tech as well. I think Virginia Tech is very much in the mix. He's a Virginia kid, so that makes sense. But I feel like our program's in a pretty good spot. Virginia Tech could have a really good year, but I feel like we're better than Virginia right now. I feel like we're in a better spot than the Virginia program is. So I like to think that we're over them, but that's not always what it's about. But he's ranked 115th ranked nationally, the 11th ranked safety in the class, and the 4th ranked player out of the state of Virginia. And of course, we just landed Jalen Gilchrist, 4-star out of Virginia, 2 4-star top 100 recruit offensive linemen, who really solidified this class as being the best under Coach Locksley. But for this class to be as complete as possible and for us to really look back and say that Maryland class was something different, I think you look to add Messiah Dell home. And if you look at her 2025 class, the biggest reason why I'm like, I would really love to land Messiah Dell home is because we don't currently have a safety in the class. And so usually I'm like, okay, you want just about every position group in the class. You want some corners, you want some linebackers, you want some defensive linemen, you want a quarterback, you want some receivers. And I look at it, we have our quarterback in 4-star Malik Washington. We have our running backs in 4-star Iverson, Howard, along with Zymir Smith could potentially play some running back, and Bud Combs. I look at it. We have our receivers. We have a couple of good receivers. Zymir Smith could possibly even play receiver. We have the Justin Devon kid, who I think is going to be a really good player, ranked as a top 11 player in the state of Maryland. And we've done a really good job of getting receivers. So we have a couple of receivers. We have a bunch of offensive linemen, including, of course, headlined by Jalen Gilchrist, who we just got. We have a tight end in JT Target from Calvert Hall in the Baltimore area. Defensive line is one spot where I do want to improve. We have Raheem Battles. We have Dante Recker, but I still would like to get a couple more guys on. We have Bryce Jenkins, of course, 4-star Bryce Jenkins, who could be on the defensive line, but that's still a spot that I want to. We have linebackers with Sidney Stewart along with Carlton Smith, who's a highly ranked player as well. And we have corners. We've recruited corners at a really high spot. We don't have a safety in this class. And so I look at it and I say, to complete this class, I think Messiah Dell home could be perfect for the Terps to complete the 2025 class. He's a special type of player. Right now, he plays both sides. He plays some running back. He plays some receiver. I was reading what the 247 evaluation said. It says he's an instinctive player with range and ball skills at safety, attacks the football, and has very good ball awareness, has been a ball magnet the last couple of seasons, and is a threat to score every time he turns it over with a track background and a clocked personal best, at 11.12, 100-meter as a sophomore. So he's a guy that's an elite level athlete. He's rangy with ball skills, which is exactly what you want in your safety. And I love this class. I think it's the best class under Coach Locksley. But to really solidify that, Messiah Delholm would need to come home. And I'm not saying that we're going to land this kid. I'm not entirely confident. Jalen Gilchrist, I said the same thing. I wasn't entirely confident. I knew South Carolina was very much in the mix for Jalen Gilchrist. But for Messiah Delholm, I feel probably less confident about. It seems like Ohio State's really where he wants to be. But can we somehow push past that and still land this kid? Because I think he make an awesome safety duo with Brandon Jacobs in the future. I think he could be a really elite type of guy with Brandon Jacobs in the back end. Of course, our 4-star safety in the 2024 class, who is about to see where if he gets any playing time this year. We have a really strong safety duo, so it's going to be hard. But both of those guys are gone next year, Dante and Glendon Miller. And we could look at starting a freshman and a sophomore next year with Messiah and Brandon Jacobs if potentially Messiah was able to commit. And I think that would be a great safety duo for the years to come. But to complete this Coach Locksley class, yeah, it's good, but you don't want to be just good. You want to start to take on the next level of great. And it's currently ranked 26, which is a really good spot for us. I think that's where we want to be, around that top 26, top 25 spot in terms of classes. And I would like to dive a little bit higher to solidify us as a top 25 class. Because technically right now, I can't say we're a top 25 class because it has us at 26. So to get us to maybe 24, 23 range, where it's a really good spot for Maryland football, I think Messiah Delholm has to come home. But we'll see. It's a DMV kid, so I think we have a good shot. I think Maryland's got to make some type of late push because Ohio State seems to be the favorite. But I do think we have a real shot at landing him. but I'm not going to say I feel confident about it at all. But I do think if we land Messiah Dell home, the 4-star safety, it would complete Maryland's 2025 class as the best class under Coach Locksley and could be known as the class that really got things going for Maryland football. I think a couple of sophomores could make huge leaps that could really impact this team. I will talk about that after this ad from the Gametime app. Have you ever wanted to go to a game at the last minute, like a Maryland Terrapins game, but finding tickets is hard? I've been there before. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Gametime is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guaranteed, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the start of an event and even an hour after it starts. It's a place to find last-minute tickets and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. I think a couple of Maryland Terrapins could make sophomore leaps. They say that sophomore year is the biggest year for your development in terms of as usually a college athlete. They say from freshman to sophomore year, you make your biggest leaps in terms of mentally, in terms of physically. That's the year where a lot of people are going to make money is from the freshman to sophomore jump. And if you're not ready to play by your sophomore year, I'm not saying you're not going to be a good player, but the percentages of you being a high-end player definitely goes down a little bit. Of course, some guys take longer, but I do believe that Maryland has a couple of players on their roster that could make huge sophomore jumps going into their sophomore years. One player I think is linebacker Michael Harris, who had to put on some weight, and I'm guessing he has put on some weight as a linebacker for Maryland because he came in, he was a little bit light. I really liked his game. He's a 4-star linebacker, and I think this year presents a lot of opportunity for him because of how things have shaken out in the linebacker room, where we've had a lot of guys leave. There's been a lot of transfers out. Of course, Jayshon Barham and Gote are all out to Auburn and to Michigan, as you guys know. So one thing, I think there's two things that are true about Michael Harris. We have a bunch of guys that transfer, not a bunch of guys, but two guys that transferred out that were on the older side, that were experienced, that were going to play a lot. And now you look at Michael Harris and you say, he's a guy that can step up behind Wheatland, behind Hippolyte as a third linebacker that could step up and play a lot of time for Maryland football. It says now he's listed at 6 feet 223. So he's definitely put on some weight. And then so he did appear last year in 8 games. Like he played a good amount, tallied 9 tackles, like in 2 pass breakups, and had a tackle for loss. So he did play a little bit at times. So he was a 4-star, like I said, top 30 linebacker recruit, ranked 242nd on ESPN, top 60 player in Florida. Like he was a guy that was a big time recruit coming in. And I also think this is where I go to my next point, where he has a ton of talent. When I saw him on the field a couple times last year, he flashed a couple of times. I was like, this kid's special, and he's a special type of athlete. He just always was going to have to put on a little bit of weight just because he was a little bit light. But I think that he could have a really good opportunity to play next year. He grew up in Jamaica, where it says he played primarily soccer. And so it's a little bit newer, but he's explosive, fast twitch, muscle fibers to shoot into the backfield and create negative plays. That's what the 247 said about him coming in, and his projection was a power 4 starter. So I do think we like him a lot. He just had to get a little bit bigger because he was light. You could have mistaken him for a safety, they said. And so I think he's in for a big jump because he has the opportunity to play a lot more, and he's also a really talented athlete. And he has a chance to make some really big plays for the Maryland Terrapins. And I like his game a lot, and I think that he has a chance to be a really top-end linebacker. I think he could be one of the more talented players on the defense. I just think it probably took a year for him to get up to date in terms of strength, in terms of muscle, but he did flash last year when I saw him. So I'm excited to see what Michael Harris looks like next year. I think he's going to be a really good player for the Terps. Another guy that's like is automatically, I'm already penciled in for him to make a huge sophomore leap, and that's going to really make an impact next year, is Dillon Wade, the tight end. I've already written it down. Everybody seems to know Dillon Wade is going to be a chance to be one of our top offensive weapons. He's a special talent, Dillon Wade is. Another Florida kid like Michael Harris, but Dillon Wade is ready. He's ready to make a huge impact. We've heard it all spring. And going into fall camp, I think he has a chance to really solidify himself as one of our main weapons. Technically, he's tight end 2 to Preston Howard, but he's a guy that I think is going to still play a lot and get a lot of time for Maryland football and do his thing that I think Dillon Wade's going to be able to do. So I do like his game. He's like 6'2". He runs fast. He's a good athlete at the tight end spot. He's a little bit smaller, but it's similar to that Corey Dyches kind of build where it's like not the fastest guy, but he's still a pretty large guy and can still run pretty fast. He's not large in terms of tight ends, but he's bigger than like the receivers. So he's a little bit of a tweener sometimes, I think of him as, but I do really like his game. And I think we've just heard about him all spring about Dillon Wade's making plays, that Dillon Wade's a breakout star, that Coach Locksley really loves Dillon Wade. And so I think about him and I think he's penciled in to make a huge impact. Like he's going to get a lot of his opportunities. Michael Harris might have to make some opportunities. Dillon Wade is going to just be given a lot of opportunities this year, being the second tight end in the Maryland offense to make a lot of plays. And then I go over to the defensive side of things, back to the defense side of things, and I really like Neo Avery. I thought he's popped in the spring game, and then I think that Neo Avery's a kid that, he didn't play last year at all because he was hurt and he redshirted, but I think that might be good for him. He came in as a top-rated recruit, 4-star, 7th-ranked player in the state of Maryland, was originally committed to Ole Miss before we flipped him, but I love Neo Avery's game, and I think he's 6'5", he's huge. He's probably hovering around 240, 250 now, and I think he can come off the edge and use his really nice frame next year to really provide some depth in our pass rushing room, really push those guys in terms of the Donald Browns and the Kellen Whites of the world, really push those guys to potentially play some. And so I think he's in for a huge leap from a guy that was hurt to a guy that redshirted last year to a guy that we could be looking at as a huge piece of the puzzle going into his junior year, going into the 2025 season. I really do like Neo Avery's game, and I really do believe that he is penciled in, or not penciled in. He's definitely the least penciled in, but he really is going to get an opportunity to play some, and I can't wait to see his role as a player next year. I think all those three guys have a chance to make a pretty good impact, pretty big impact on the Maryland football team. And you need these types of guys. I want to bring back up the point that I talked about with sophomores. If you're not starting to get some time as a sophomore, if you're not really starting to grasp things as a sophomore, you kind of start to ask, when are these things going to happen? So I'm going to be looking at other freshmen as well, sophomores that are going to make that leap, because nobody really played much in terms of that freshman class last year, that 2023 class. So now we're going to be looking at that 2023 class to make a big impact. Next, are any freshmen have a realistic shot at playing this year? I'll talk about that right now. So the Maryland freshman class, I do really like it, and I think it's a good class. But I also thought the 2023 class was a pretty good class. But do any of the 2024s have a chance? Any of the freshmen, the 2024 class, have a chance to play next year for the Terps? And the short answer is, when I go through it, not really. There's guys that I believe have a chance to, if injury happen or something like that, have a chance to put themselves definitely in there to potentially play a good amount. But in terms of guys that are realistically going to play right away, I don't see a lot of guys that probably will play right away just because of how our roster is constructed. And a lot of the top guys come in as guys that are, yes, good players, but there's just position groups that are filled. And if they weren't filled, that'd be a problem. You don't want a bunch of freshmen to come onto your football team and play. That's just not the way you want it to happen. And so I look at the roster and I say, okay, Brandon Jacobs, our top rated player in the class of 2024. Top end safety, I talked about him earlier with the Messiah Delhomme, how I think they could combine to make a really cool safety duo for Maryland football. But I'm looking at Brandon Jacobs and I'm saying he probably would be my number one guy where I say he's really talented and he has a chance to play. But then I say not really, because Dante Trader and Glendon Miller are going to be in the back end, and those two guys are really good players in the back end, two guys that are going to be looking to push to get maybe drafted in the NFL. So I'm looking at that and I'm saying, unless injury in the back end happens, Brandon Jacobs probably not really going to get a ton of time. I could see Maryland rotating him in to get him ready for next year, where he has a really good shot at starting at one of the safety spot. But in terms of next year, he probably isn't going to play a ton for Maryland football. And so I'm looking at him as a guy and I'm like, probably not. And then I go down the roster, I look at Mekhi White at receiver, and I say, I really like his frame at 6'3", out of Virginia, 185. I like his frame, but we have other guys in that receiver room, there's actually a lot of depth, I like to think, in that receiver room with guys like Ryan Manning, Shalik Knotts, Octavian Smith, Robert Smith. There's a lot of those in-betweener guys that aren't quite starters like Ty Felton is or Caden Prather, but they're guys that are going to fill out that receiver room. And Mekhi White, unless he just plays at a special level, I just don't really see it for the Terps. And then I look at Dimitri Nichols as someone that's interesting. Being a defensive lineman, we don't have a ton of depth in the defensive line group. We do have some guys, of course, the starters, King Basote and Jordan Phillips, and Isaac Bunyan and Taze Johnson. I think, and so I do think that there's a spot for him maybe to potentially get some time and some rotation, but still, it's still like deep enough where I say he probably doesn't play a ton in the middle of the defense. He's a big kid, so he could come in physically and be ready to go, but still maybe some rotation minutes, but probably not. And then I look at the running back, Williams, out of St. Francis, Baltimore, who is a 4-star, and I like his game a lot too, but I also say we have 3 running backs that I feel are confident are over him. And so unless they want to give him some time where it's like garbage minutes, I don't see a lot for him either. Braden Lee was a 4-star for a while and a top end player who we flipped from South Carolina, the cornerback. He might have the best opportunity because I see a realistic place where maybe 2 of our guys are struggling on the outside in terms of Perry Fisher or Jalen Husky. Either one could potentially struggle on the outside. And you could look at Braden Lee and say he's a really talented freshman that could maybe play next year. But I do like those 2. I do like our 2 corners. I think Perry and Jalen Husky both have a chance to be good. I can just see a world where Braden Lee could potentially, if things aren't going well, could take over in that cornerback room. So he probably is the guy I give the best opportunity to. Ryan Howerton, don't be surprised. The tackle freshman, I would prefer not to see Ryan Howerton just because I don't want to see freshman linemen, offensive linemen playing right away. That tells me that the depth up there isn't right. But he is a good player. He was a 4-star on Rivals for a little bit. And so I look at him as a guy and say, maybe potentially could he get in there? Could he play a little bit? And I was looking at kind of where he falls. He could fall maybe as the backup tackle now with the injury to Isaiah Wright. So maybe there's a possibility. But really, I don't see a ton of freshmen that are going to come in and be guys that play right away. You like to think that maybe you have a guy or 2 that could come in and not start, but really come in and show a lot of talent. Maybe he just gets in the mix, whether it's in the receiver room, in the corner room, in the linebacker room, whatever it is. But I don't see that from Maryland football. And I feel like we haven't had too many of those guys in terms of guys that come in right away. They take a second to develop, which is completely fine. But I like our 2023 class, but nobody really played in that class. I like our 2024 class, but I don't know if I think Brandon Jacobs is talented enough, but I don't know if he's going to, just because of Dante and Glendon in front of him. That's all we have for today. Thank you for listening to Locked on Terps. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're here every day talking Maryland football and basketball. So thank you for listening to Locked on Terps.